Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's interview. My name is Amanda Clewis, and I'm here with author David Field, and we're going to be talking about his brand new book called Over Next: Making Your Life Count After a Major Loss. I'm the clinical director at Compass Ministries, and we're a ministry based in Tampa that provides a variety of support services to missionaries before they go to the field, while they're serving the Lord overseas, and long after they return. We offer a variety of services, including clinical counseling, pastoral counseling, coaching, debriefing, play therapy, marriage counseling, and so on. If you're interested in finding out more about our services, please check out our website, compass-ministries.net. So tonight I'm joined by author David Field.
Yep.
He's written several books, but just came out with this one called Over Next. And I'm very excited as a counselor because I work with a lot of people who have faced incredible losses. And actually, everybody encounters loss at some point in their lives.
Yeah.
But this is a really great resource for those who have encountered a loss, but are trying to figure out how to move forward.
Absolutely.
And so David comes to us with a lot of personal and professional experience. So David, welcome. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you all for attending and tuning in, so shall we say. I had the privilege of going to the University of Kansas, and while I was there, I became a Christian. And I remember I think I was saying this earlier to some friends. I remember specifically that day that I became a Christian. I was driving in my car and I made a U-turn in the street. It's a small town, and
Like an actual U-turn?
like an actual U-turn.
Okay.
We had one stoplight, so there you go. And I realized, and I thought to myself, my life's going to be different, and it really has been. I had the good fortune of being involved with Campus Crusade for Christ as a student, and then I went on staff with what they now call Crew. Spent some really good years with them, and while I was there, Amanda, I became more interested in families and the dynamics of family. It struck me that no matter whether students were Christians or not Christians or this or that or whatever, all of them had the same influence in the sense of their family that they grew up in, and how did that family impact them as individuals. So I left staff, went back to graduate school, got a degree in counseling, and then I worked for a very large church in Des Moines and was the minister of family life, did a lot of lay counseling types of activities. And while I was there, I got some more training as a family systems therapist in marriage and family. And then started my own Christian counseling center in Des Moines and did that for a few years there, and then moved to Florida and been here ever since. So in Florida, I was practiced as a licensed marriage and family therapist. You know, with all of that, and then it sort of dovetailed into what we're talking about tonight. I so appreciated the opportunities to work with people who had been through some difficult straits. And then wouldn't you know it, that condition knocked on my door. And I lost my wife 3.5 years ago, and it really sent me into a spin. It was a gut punch, Amanda. It was hard. It really was. And through that, began to kind of say, okay, what do I do now? And, I think that's true for a lot of people. I was reminded of a scene in the book by Anthony Doerr called About Light. And the scene is that Marie, who's a French young woman who had become blind, and she's communicating messages to the Allies, and this German soldier, Gunther, who discovers that she's doing this, but he's fascinated because she's using classical music to communicate the messages, and he loves the classical music, so he's sort of caught in this quandary. He chases her down, or not chases her down. He finds out where she is. And sure enough, he saves her from an impending bombardment. And as he escorts her out of the city, he says to her, he says, I just am amazed at what you've been able to do, being blind and accomplishing all these things. And she said, you know, a lot of people tell me that, but I didn't have a choice.
Mm.
And I think that really plays out for people in life. You know, I didn't have a choice. You know, God didn't say, well, is it okay if I take your wife?
Mm.
And a lot of people, as I said, we run into situations, it's not our doing, it's something else that has happened to us.
Mhm.
But at that juncture, and I think it's a really important point for all of us, that juncture is it's not what happens to you, it's
Mhm.
what you do with what happens to you.
Mhm. Exactly.
And that really is sort of the genesis, if you will, of my thinking, and becoming interested in writing down some things about the book. And it became over next through sort of a interesting circumstance. There you go.
Okay. So it's inevitable that pretty much all of us are going to encounter loss in our lives, that whether it's a loss of a loved one, a spouse,
Oh, yeah.
a child, perhaps a debilitating sickness, or I've met with many people who are serving the Lord overseas who even have a moral failing, and then all of a sudden they have to lose their job, they lose their posting, they have to move, everything changes. And so you made the statement, it's not what happens to you, but it's what do you do about it?
Yeah.
And so to
Yeah.
kind of tell us more about that or the inspiration for
Well,
over next.
yeah, that's kind of a fun thing to talk about, really. I was reading the Wall Street Journal, which is sort of a habit of mine on
Mhm.
Sunday afternoon, so I get the Weekender, what they call the Weekender. And there was an article by Peggy Noonan, and she was talking about a situation, a political situation. And she was commenting about this one politician just didn't know when to really say it's over,
Mhm.
you know, be done with it.
Mhm.
And then she told the story of about Norman Lear. And he was at this birthday party. They threw him a birthday party. So he was 100 years old.
Wow.
And so later on in the evening, he was pontificating about different things. And he said, you know, there's two words in the English language we don't use enough. And so that piqued everybody's interest, of course. And of course, the question comes, okay, what are they? Yeah, tell me. Um, and he said, over and next. And come on now, you can come up with something better than that. But he said, you know, it's a key talent. You know, this is what really got me. It's a key talent in life to know when something's over and to be able then pursue the next in the future. And how do people make that transition?
Mhm.
You know, like we just mentioned,
Mhm.
things happen. And what do we do about things that
Mhm.
happen to us? Somehow in there, we need to be able to put to bed, so to speak, an event or a loss that has happened to us. Not that we don't remember it, not that the person or situation wasn't valuable to us, but we need to be able to digest it,
Mhm.
be okay with it, and then encounter what's around the corner.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I it just left off the page to me, and I thought, and I started writing, and just and part of the writing, Amanda, was I just had to be able to process this myself. It had been about a year since Lana had died, and you know, I loved her deeply. We were commingled, so to speak. You know, it was like I was an amputee, you know, an emotional amputee, you know, the ghost limb that's no longer there. And you have those moments of conversation, but there's no response on the other side. And so how do you put together saying what's, you know, recognizing that she's no longer here, and how do I move forward? And I think a lot of people in this kind of situation are caught in that quandary. How do you move forward and maintain a loyalty or a respect for that person that, you know, in my case, that I deeply loved, and yet at the same time realize that she's no longer here, She's with the Lord, and I have tomorrow that I need to deal with.
Mhm.
And so that I struggle with that. Trying to understand it, trying to feel it through. And as I was doing that, I was making comments, writing things down.
Mm.
And so that sort of was the beginning, if you will, but it's all tendered around the idea, and to people who are listening, I think, it's imperative that people have had a major loss, that take advantage oftentimes of a grief group, if not that, at least be able to give yourself permission to grieve. It's a healthy thing to do. And but where I was is, okay, in that grief, in that grieving, what do you do after that?
Mhm.
I wanted for people to be able to do more than just survive a loss.
Mhm.
I wanted them to thrive
Mhm.
in moving forward. And I realize, even saying that tonight, some people hearing that who are in the midst of a loss, that can almost sound offensive,
Mm.
because it's, what do you mean? I'm going through this terrible time, and you're talking about thriving as a
Mhm.
result of this. Yes, I am, but I'm not talking about it today if it's a recent loss. I'm talking about that something down the road. But I wanted people to be able to see that there's something after loss. Loss doesn't have to define us.
Mm.
It doesn't have to dictate our future. As a matter of fact, loss then becomes almost the seedbed for something, as we move into the next chapter of life, for some unforeseen successes. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the picture of what happened in my thinking that was
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
And that probably generated too, Amanda, from years and years and years of counseling, is that I didn't want people to be satisfied with their plight.
Mm.
There's more than that.
Mhm.
And also to be able to turn the lemon into the lemonade, if you will, is that plight became the genesis for growth.
Mhm.
And that is hard for us to accept.
It is.
And it's harder for us even when we're in the middle of it. But at the same time, it's true.
And that's where I so appreciate you have the training of a therapist, a counselor, understanding concepts of grief and recovery, but you also have the personal experience of losing your wife of 52 years, and how this book came out of that
Right.
personal experience. Because for some, it could seem kind of insensitive. What do you mean I need to get over this
Yeah.
loss? But
Right.
there's a lot of resources out there on grief, but I think that we need more resources on how do you live and
Right.
find purpose after your loss.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, one of the really cool terminologies that you used in your book is called a life tsunami. Tell us, what does that mean?
Well, yeah. Some of us, maybe most of you, are familiar with some recent videos. We just over the weekend, we had a number of storms in Kentucky and Tennessee and different places and so forth. And the video is often showing, houses submerged with running river water, or visit California and you see houses burned to the ground. And that is a life changer for people. They've lost everything. It's a moment in time that they will not forget. All right. And back in the day, some of the videos of the real tsunamis in off of the Asian coast and so forth, these waves coming in such a fashion that everything in their way was just rolled over.
Yeah.
And you look at the devastation. Well, that's the picture of a tsunami in our lives. I'm not talking about, a minor loss. I'm not talking about a hiccup along the way. I'm talking about something that rolls you over. I'm talking about, I will not forget November 7th, 2021. Okay. That's a major tsunami. And what it does is it plants a mark in your life.
Yeah.
Right. And but we don't want that mark in our life to be not retracted, but remember to the point that we don't have any other marks in our life as we move forward. So a tsunami is an event or a situation. Somebody has dreamed their whole life about getting into medical school. Somebody, has, just in the throes of a major medical thing. A man or a woman who dreamed about being married and having children, and then his marriage blows up. And the devastation of that. And one of the things about a tsunami that impacts us, Amanda, is it wipes out our sense of the future. If you're married, you have some expectations. If you're going toward medical school, you have some expectations. And you've centered your whole life around that. Well, maybe not your entire life, but a major part of your life. That's a big deal. And then all of a sudden, it's no longer. The plans, the expectations, sometimes those plans are real and sometimes they're subconscious, unconscious expectations. They're no longer there. So the person ends up going into emotional behavioral shock, a wandering, unfocused kind of movement that doesn't have definition to it. I think too that people can be going through the motions, the robotic, and not really be there. They can answer your question, they can, attend a meeting, they can go to work, but there's nothing much inside. I remember a lady I talked to one time who had lost her child, and she said, I don't remember the last 2 years. There's nothing there. All I know is I was just in this zone that had no, I was just wandering. And that's real. So that's what I mean by a life tsunami. It's not a mild type of encounter. It's something that rocks your world, that hits you in the gut, that you don't know what you're going to do. And in a lot of cases, I think people, they just give up. They don't have the energy, the wherewithal, and certainly they don't have the hope. Hope has been dashed. And so, over next is really partly about the fact that I don't want the loss to win.
Okay.
I wanted the loss to be, a stimulus, if you will, to another path. It's not the same path. And, I like to say, my life is not over, it's just different. So what's that different life look at? And get them and, encourage them to instill a hope and some energy, if you will, begin to think about that as far as their future is concerned. So.
Well, I love that word hope. That's what this book gives to people, a sense of hope and that there is life even when you've endured a life tsunami.
Right.
Now, another term that I liked from your book is called the smog zone.
Yeah,
and you started to allude to it. Tell us what you mean by the smog zone and what it was like for you personally then.
Well, my first experience with smog was in Southern California. So there you go.
Literal smog.
Yeah, and then I think it found its way in some other places. So the smog zone, yeah. And I was playing golf with a friend and said, well, you can do this, you got to do that, I said, Benny, that's all what can happen if we move from just a feeling oriented type of process to something where we begin to install some things that are factual and begin to move not just have the subjective, but also the objective. And so the smog zone is really a picture, if you will, that helps me. But I look at it and I'm experiencing this inside, but what I see is, okay, there's a point in time when this event took place, but then there's also this. And at that point in time, I'm overwhelmed and with my feelings and so forth. But over a period of time, that sense of being overwhelmed goes down, and the sense of next or accommodating to the future begins to go up. And those two lines cross.
Okay.
And the reason I put that down on paper and made a graph out of it is to help people get it out of here in their head, their feelings, and see it on paper. That this is a real life situation, this is a real situation. And then, what happens is when I talk to people about that, well, I don't even have to ask. They'll say, well, I think I'm right here on the smog zone, Well, tell me what you mean by that, or describe that to me. Well, this is taking place, I'm a little better here, and I've thought about some opposite possibilities for the future over here, and so that there's movement there. One of the, I think, kind of neat things that happens to people that helps them move not just from feelings but also to facts is how our brain works. The amygdala is that fight flight part of us, and it's protecting us, and if we have a big loss, it's kind of getting a lot of protection going up, and it's on guard. Okay, we're looking around everywhere. We don't want anything to happen. And the cerebral cortex is that rational thinking, processing kind of part of us. And in the beginning of a loss, the amygdala kind of runs the show. All the emotions are there. But over a period of time, the cerebral cortex, even without our intention, it's without our will, if you will, without our determination, it begins to settle things down in the brain. And then there's this process of what we call neuroplasticity, where literally the brain is making new pathways. And so that amputee guy that's lost his wife, that ghost limb begins to go away because the brain is reorienting me to the present realities. So that's happening for us while we're recovering, if you will. And I think it's a neat thing that, that's working for us. The smog zone is intended to get us to moving from just subjective, the feelings, to some of the facts and some of the things that are true about us. And when that takes place, we begin to get some momentum, and we're facing that loss, we're digesting it, and then we begin to peek around the corner, so to speak, and say, what's out there.
Now, in the book, you recount some of your personal experience of how, after you went through the grieving process, you were present and you were functioning and doing all the things you needed to do, working out, taking care of your dogs, exercising, but you weren't really present.
Right.
So is that a normal part of the process? And where's the turning point to be present?
I don't think you can. I think that's so different for a lot of people. Now, it's not different in the sense that it takes place. It's different in the sense when and how it takes place. For me, I would say it was a good year and a half before, things began to really gain some momentum. But yeah, people say, how are you doing? Which I thank them for asking, but at the same time, it was, those were, I didn't want to hear his words because then I had to talk about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I needed to talk about it, but I didn't want to talk about it. So it was sort of that, I describe myself, I'm walking, but I'm limping.
Mm,
But life began to come back, and I forced myself, um, to pursue, and I did that because I came to the realization that like I said earlier, it wasn't my choice that Lana left, but it was somebody else's choice, and the Lord's in charge, and He was in charge of my wife. And He knew the day that she was born would be, He also knew the day that she would be with Him.
mm,
And so I had to kind of submit to that, if you will,
mhm,
in faith and in trust. And I had something that I'm so thankful for, Amanda, and that is I had joy for her,
mm,
that she made it,
okay.
and she made it in good fashion,
Mm,
and it was a victory.
mm,
She didn't fear death.
mm,
She walked right into it. So, I had that as a point of reference.
mhm,
So I knew somehow that I would make it through,
mhm,
and I knew somehow I needed to make it through.
mhm,
And what my struggle was just being able to digest it in such a way that I was okay, if you will, with um, honoring Lana and not seeing me moving forward as a dishonoring or as a lack of loyalty. And I came to the point where I realized, Dave, you really got this backwards. Moving on is honoring to her.
mm,
And that's, in coming to that, it kind of relieved me.
mm,
And I think that, an illustration that maybe is good that I use in the book, and that is, if you're going down the road of life, and I happen to be in a situation where we were going to Starbucks, that's not an advertisement, but there you go. And my friend says, well, Dave, so what do you see? And I said, well, an open road. And he said, well, anything else? And I said, well, you got the side mirrors and another thing. He said, well, Dave, you can look out. If you're going to move forward, you need to be looking out the windshield.
mm.
He said, but I do have a rear view mirror.
Ah,
Okay. But if I'm going to move forward, primarily I need to keep my focus on what's ahead of me, not what's behind me. I know what's behind me if I want to take a glance, but that's sort of the proportion, if you will, being aware of what's in front of you with the proportion or with the point of reference of what's behind me. And I honor that. I'm overjoyed and happy about that. But I also know that, Amanda, I can't live there.
yeah.
It's a part of me, but I'm no longer a part of it in that sense. And so that was the pivot point for me of saying, okay, it's all right. And I need to do this. I need to do it to honor her. I need to do it to honor the Lord. And I began to really accept, okay, there is purpose for me in my future. I don't know what that is, but there is purpose there.
I think I love your imagery of the looking forward through the windshield.
Yeah.
Having a rear view mirror, so looking back a little bit.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
order to move forward, you have to be mostly forward looking. And I imagine that this question of like loyalty and honoring your loved one who's passed away is a part of why a lot of people get stuck. Like,
Yeah.
I will be dishonoring my loved one if I choose to move forward.
Yeah.
Or I'm being disloyal if I
Yep.
choose to move forward. So tell us a little bit more about how you worked through that by honoring Lana through moving forward.
Well, like I said earlier, we were very commingled, and it was as if to move in it, and I'm not always glad to be using the term move and move forward, because that is so common, if you will. I mean, you just got to move forward. You just got to move forward. Well, it's pretty insensitive. Somebody
Mhm.
said, you just lost your wife. You just got to move forward.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. He had good advice.
Yeah.
So I wasn't captivated in a one sense of moving forward. What I was really captivated, what released me was that I separated those two out, that I carry that forward in the sense of honoring and respecting that. But I'm in a different life circumstance.
Mhm.
And the illustration sometimes I've used is I lived in Des Moines and I moved to Clearwater.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm no longer in Des Moines.
Mhm.
Clearwater's got different streets. It's got different traffic patterns. It's got different people. It's got different surroundings. It affects your children and so forth. So, we can look back to Des Moines and say, oh gosh, I wish it was in Des Moines. But if I keep doing that, how beneficial is that? And how beneficial is it going to be if I keep looking back to the people around me? It's not. So it just hit me, Dave, you know, Des Moines has pleasant memories. Let it be. It's okay. But because you're living today doesn't translate to disloyalty what's there. And that's what really set me free. To living today and being in the moment has nothing to do with the dishonoring of of what I had in the past. But I'm no longer in the past. So that's where things I think began to really come together for me. And it is, it's mildly challenging, sometimes really challenging. How do you learn to live in your new circumstance when so much has changed? And particularly, what's your motivation to, to live in that new circumstance? Because again, it feels empty. So that's where, I say to myself and to others and so forth, there is opportunity and there's purpose in learning how to thrive in a new life circumstance, a new chapter of life. And what, I kept depending on is that this was something that God allowed in his sovereign grace and mercy. And so in doing that and recognizing that and really relying upon that, that's when things began to just congregate even for me, even more. We talked about the hope. I think that is such a hard thing sometimes when you've been devastated by a loss, to talk about hope in a casual way can seem pretty insensitive. But it's also very needed. And without that, you can really get lost, or if you will, stay lost. So, that's where I was with those things. And then I got to thinking, well, okay, what do I do now? What's up now? So and so that began to think about that. And I just, again, I've spent my whole life with the goal, the desire of helping people thrive. I want to see them be successful. And I take great joy in that. I really do, for them, because there's nothing more exciting to me than somebody tasting the fruit of their own success, coming through a loss doesn't mean it has to be gangbusters. What it means is that you're at peace with yourself. What it means is you've resolved it. What it means is you've digested it. What it means is that you dare to peek into the future. That's what that means. That's really the victory. That's the thriving, that you didn't let the loss beat you.
Yes.
And
Amen
that
to
is
that.
so absolutely tempting in the beginning. It
Hmm.
really is. My attitude was, Jesus, take me home. You know, I didn't need to be around anymore.
Yeah.
I was,
And I'm sure so many people feel that way after a
absolutely,
huge
they
loss.
do. But that's not the end of the story. That's part of the process.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I love that in the book you talk about accepting the reality of your new circumstances and adjusting to
Right.
that new reality,
Right.
which is kind of the starting point that provides the background to what you call next. So I wanted to read a little excerpt from one of your
Okay,
chapters.
let's do it.
This is page 51, and it says defining next. Next is the process of transitioning from what was to what is. Even though there's likely to be understandable resistance, it's difficult to imagine feeling good again, particularly if it feels like your life has ended. It may feel like you are being pushed into uncomfortable territory, but in reality, next is an invitation to conquer the loss in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit
Absolutely.
more about the next process.
Yeah. Back to Norman Lear. I just don't think most of us, when a loss has occurred, I don't think we think of next.
Right.
I
We're
think
just surviving.
I think we think of getting over it or
Mm.
getting through it.
Mhm,
I don't
mhm.
think, that just doesn't conjugate for us most of the time or much of the time. And so I began to think, if God has taken my wife, if God has allowed for a loss in your life or in my life or somebody else's loss, that has purpose, in the sense of He's going to take advantage of that for you. Now, at the time, I don't hear that.
Right.
Okay. I certainly don't feel it.
Mhm,
But in truth, that's the case.
mhm.
And so when I started looking at next, it was all around, how do I profit, not financially, but how do I profit personally in this new world?
Mhm.
And to begin to orchestrate that in such a way and picture that for people so that they begin to think about it.
Mm.
It is hard, as I mentioned there, it's hard for anybody to imagine that my life can have joy and meaning after such a devastating loss. They just, and
It's hard to see that.
you don't want to talk about that to somebody that's in a recent loss, but 6 months into it, a year into it, when they've sort of digested some of it, that's the point when we start thinking about or involving ourselves in next. And so, I put together next in an acronym, N being necessary,
Okay.
E being expectation,
Mhm.
X being exercise, a lot of people's favorite word, right? And T for trust.
Hmm.
And I thought that maybe that begin to capture things for people and give some perspective on it. And what N really refers to is it's necessary. And if you don't exercise, or if you don't do anything, if there's no movement, kids will break their arm, be in a cast, and what happens? Well, they take the cast off the arm, and the arm is just not much left there. But why? Because the muscles have atrophied, And so, in putting that into the equation of moving on, it is necessary to move on, to move forward, to embrace the future, because otherwise, what happens to us psychologically and emotionally? We atrophy. We shut down. I know people who have shut down.
Yeah.
I've got a good friend right now who lost her husband, and she's struggling, and she reads the words, she talks about it, we talk about everything. And so, and I say, hey, it's okay. You're in the smog zone. You're there and you're figuring things out. But it's not going to be okay 5 years from now or 2 years from now. Not in judgment, but for her. as a person. So that's one thing. I think the other thing about necessary, and sometimes we forget that, Amanda, people are looking at us.
Hmm.
I have 3 children. I have 8 grandchildren.
Wow.
They need me to move.
Hmm.
You know, they need me to be able to, to take it on and move through it and come out on the other side. They need that. And sometimes our laws can be so self-captivating that it's all about what's going on with us. And we're all maybe sometimes even affronted or frustrated that others want us to move, but it's not in judgment. It's they need that for you. So it's is necessary in the sense of atrophy. It's necessary in the sense of recognizing that there are other people in the equation with us. I lost a wife. My 3 kids lost a mother. So they're dealing with things too. And then the other thing about necessary is the thinking that's there as far as not the expectation, but without moving, we lose a sense of ourselves. Okay. And it's a detriment to us. It becomes us in a sense of defeat that we came up against something and we backed away from it. And I think there in those times, that's where people really benefit. When I was even writing, I kind of was thinking in terms of groups. We can benefit from the support or at least the opportunity to talk about where we're at.
Yes.
And so that in coming up against that wall, if you will, or that difficulty, we don't back away. We somehow maneuver through it. So anyway, that was the necessary part, the end, if you will. And then expectation. What do you do with that? There are ripple effects to loss.
Absolutely.
Okay. And that can be an anniversary date. It can be a song. It can be this or that. It can be any number of things that, it reacquaints itself, but it's okay. It's all right that it presents itself, but we can expect that. And when it does, it's not like, we've done something wrong. It's not like we're not making progress. It's just very simply the fact that, okay, we have, we are making progress. And that's just part of the equation. I think that the other thing I was going to say about necessary slipped my mind, which I thought was a great illustration. A lot of people may be familiar with the song with the movie Shawshank Redemption.
Love that one.
So, Candy's talking to Morgan Freeman, and he says, "Well, you got to get living or you better start dying." So that's that necessary thing. It kind of feeds into atrophy. It feeds into the idea of our family and so forth. You got a choice. It's maybe abrupt, but it's, I think Andy said it well. You got to start living or you better start dying. And, the thing for Andy is, and that's the walls that sometimes are tall and wide. Andy saw over the walls, Morgan Freeman didn't. He had been in there a long time. The walls defined him, defined his space. He can go so far. Andy dreamed about the other side. And that to me is a critical piece in all of movement, if you will, is to encourage people to get to living and stop dying. As far as expectation, like I said, the ripple effect, we can expect that. We can expect to look at ourselves and see, okay, what progress am I making?
Hmm.
I loved, I had the occasion a number of years ago to be in Florence and go to the museum where, or the gallery where David is, the Michelangelo fame. And a company in there, and almost back in the corner, Amanda, they had some unfinished granite pieces of Michelangelo's. And one of them is there's this person kind of like this, kind of reaching up like that. And he's like a third to a half, and the rest of it is just marble block that has not been finished.
Okay.
And the title of the that particular piece of work is called A Rising Slave. Okay. And this person is, you see them coming out.
Yeah.
They're not finished. And that's the picture I think I'd like to paint for people is, okay, you've been in loss, and this future, this next that's what's happening to you. You're coming out. And you're this rising slave that is no longer just encased in block and controlled, but there's life coming to you. And so, you can legitimately expect that. And that seems again like, well, Dave, come on now. How can we? Well, you can. There's motion there, whether you're cooperating or not. And sometimes something's going to hit you, some thought, some event, some situation, and you're going to think, okay, enough is enough. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm gonna move into that next chapter of my life. So
I love that picture of kind of a new creation coming out of the old.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people struggle with, how do I continue with my life as it was? And it's just not possible. It has to be something new and different that we're moving towards. Yeah. Because our reality is different.
And I don't want to make it, as we talk about it, I don't want to make it a job, like an obligation, like you better, or else, or you failed. No, I'm saying it as a promise, then it's not for me. It's a promise that God does not finish himself in you until you die. He's still working in you, and he's folding your loss into something that's going to be better, because that's his promise. And what I mean by better is not that we can measure that by life circumstance. What I mean by better is you are better as a person. You're more refined. You're more full. You're more sophisticated in your capacity to deal with your surroundings. How many older people, the young ones, will be all upset about this or that or whatever, and they'll with wisdom, not with intelligence necessarily, but with wisdom, they'll say to you, really irritated one time. I moved to Clearwater, and this friend of mine, he'd say, well, babe, it's going to work out. And I'm thinking, I don't have a job. My practice is not working. I got 3 kids in high school, and you're saying, oh, it's going to be fine. Oh, okay. But there is not just wisdom, but there's truth in that.
And perspective too.
Yeah. And does that mean it's without pain? No, not at all. It's there. But we have an able, if you will, master. We have an able Savior that doesn't protect us from the pain of life, but it certainly walks with us through the pain of life. So there you go.
Well, one of the really cool things about your little book is that it has a lot of reflection questions in it to kind of do some self-assessment, and you encourage the readers to take an honest look about what their status is. And I mean, that's hard to do when somebody's encountered a huge grief and loss, but with some time after that, as they've gone through the recovery process, there does come a time to kind of do some self-assessment.
Yeah, I'm always been a big fan of that. Kind of planning ahead, and okay, what's on my table here? My skill sets, my situation with people and friends and work, and all of those kinds of things, and assess it. So we know where we're at.
Mhm.
And then dare to ask the question. If there were no limitations, what would I like to do? What would I like to be? What, what would I like to encounter?
Mhm.
Um, and to begin to think out of the box. And why? Not because you're going to do all of those things, but because it stimulates your thoughts. It
Yeah.
gets you to thinking out of this controlled environment that you're in. Like Morgan Freeman in the prison. We box ourselves in. We don't think what's out there, right? So get your bases taken care of, and then begin to think about that. Begin to pray about that. Begin to talk to your friends about it. So yes, I think that's a really nice move. And getting that, establishing that awareness. And then, then we move into exercise and to trust. And
Do you mean literal exercise?
I love it. I love it.
That's what you mean.
There's a term back in the day, psychosomatic, okay, so our emotions affect our bodies. Well, it goes in reverse as well. So when we're in a funk in our loss and everything, we don't feel like doing anything and so forth, and our attitudes. So I think movement, and I use the term exercise, but I'll broaden that a little bit. I think the term movement is really critical. We need to have movement. We can't stay stationary. The classic, Tom Hanks on the beach, with that war movie and so forth, and they're all pinned down. The machine guns are, just taking them right and left. And he tells the people, he says, look, if we stay here, we're dead. The only way to save ourselves is to move forward, which is totally counterintuitive to what we want to do. We want to go the other way.
Yes.
So that's this idea of movement, is we need to move, and movement creates and leads to the situation where our physical movement influences our attitude. Okay. And I do think physical movement is really an important aspect of that. There's some people who literally can't do that, and who will want to throw the book at me if I suggest it. But, I talk about it. I said, can you do some squats? And squats are really a good exercise. 5 squats, 10 squats. And I go back and forth, and I said, well, okay, you can't do 10 squats. Can you do 5? No, I can't do 5. Can you do 1? No, I can't do that. Can you think about doing 1? Well, maybe. But it's not just squats, just standing on one leg, working on balance, stretching, taking a walk, dancing, things that there is movement.
Yes.
And when we're moving, what it does is it distracts us away from this other side of us, number one, and it's a success. James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, I thought made a good point. He says, well, if you're having trouble getting going, he uses the term attach it to an already established activity. So I don't know about you, but I get my coffee every morning. And so attach an activity that you don't want to exercise. Okay, well then journal for 5 minutes while you're having your cup of coffee, or get on your knees and pray for 5 minutes, or call a friend, or send a check to Compass Ministries. Create movement. It's already established habit. Attach something to it so it makes it, so it works better. So yeah, if it's not physical movement, which I still think has merit, but some can't. There's the journaling, there's the volunteering, there's having accountability with a friend. There's where you have something in your schedule, you obligate yourself. People who have pets, in a sense, it's a good thing because it makes them walk, makes them have some responsibility and so forth. So that's there. As far as the physical exercise, and then there's exercise that's non-moving exercise, that's the journaling and so forth. Then the last one is T for trust, and that's, what do you mean, Dave? You want me to trust that things are going to be good when this has happened? You know, Ruth, in the book of Ruth, in the first chapter, Naomi makes a statement to Ruth. She says, "The Lord Almighty has dealt bitterly with me." And I thought about that, and I thought, and she experienced it as not only a bitterness in the sense of that something went wrong and I'm on the wrong side of Jesus. And not that, at that point, it wasn't Jesus. I'm on the wrong side of God Almighty. And then later she, you know, she expands on that a little bit. And I thought, not just thinking she did something wrong, but the bitterness of the hurt, the pain of the loss and so forth. And so how can I trust that things are going to be better when something's been so bad? And that's where that trust factor comes in. And we, you know, in a sense, we all trust. You know, I get on a plane, I trust that it's going to take off okay and land okay. You know, Karate Kid, you know, Mr. Miyagi says, well, keep polishing. Keep doing that. Yeah, wax on, yeah. And the kid is saying, this guy is lost it. But later on, sure enough, it comes in the end. So there's trust is, you know, the game that we played, you know, thrust your hand, you know, just like that and fall backwards. Okay, and trust that somebody's going to catch it. Well, trust is not guaranteed, but it's reasonable. Okay, it's reasonable to trust you're going to take off and land okay. It's reasonable to trust that if you go through the process, there's going to be results. It is reasonable in all phases. I think then the big question for some, because they have been so hurt and they haven't resolved this with the Lord, you know, whom do we trust? You know, I think of that passage in Jeremiah 29, where the Lord says, or Jeremiah tells him, well, you know, build houses, plant gardens, and then, you know, embrace the city. And he says, while you're in exile. And you notice he tells them to be active in this new environment. He doesn't say anything about going back to Jerusalem. He says, do it here. And you know, Amanda, that's part of the trust. Okay, God has put me here. And so I trust that he's put me here for his purposes. So I build my house, my garden, and I embrace city. So I think those are the critical pieces of the next. It's necessary, expect things, exercise, and trust. We have somebody in our trusting that is worthy of our trust.
Amen to that. You know, as we're going through these dark valleys of life and loss, it is a wonderful thing to know we have a God who's trustworthy. He knows what we're going through. He's with us in it. And one of my big takeaways as I read your book was that going through a life tsunami, a major loss, it's an invitation to a different way of life, to grow, to be refined, maybe against our will. We wouldn't have chosen this path, but we're on it.
That's right.
And we do have choices about how we're going to get through it and keep on living. So David, I really appreciate you spending time with us tonight.
It's been great.
Thank you for this great resource, and everybody who's watching. Overnext is available on Amazon for less than $20. It's got a 5-star review. You can also check out David's website, overnextproject.com. There are some videos about his teaching, more information about the book. You can interact with David through that website if you'd like. So check it out. It's not an intimidating book. It's very practical. And so if you or someone you know is in need of help kind of making the next steps as they have endured a life tsunami, this is a great resource to check out. Also, if you have questions about Compass Ministries, feel free to visit our website, compass-ministries.net. And we also want to invite all of you, of our viewers, to our annual World of Hope banquet. It's going to be on May 3rd at 6:30 p.m. at Tampa Covenant Church in Tampa. And everyone is welcome if you'd like to RSVP or get more information about the banquet. Again, visit our website, compass-ministries.net. And thank you, David, for joining us tonight. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, Amanda. And thank Compass Ministries. And folks, over next. And let's jump on the bandwagon and move in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you.